The morning you became a target analyst, you wore a pressed collar. Nobody told you what that collar would cost. You sat in a cold fluorescent room with a laminated map. A paper cup of bad coffee cooled beside your left hand. The room smelled like printer toner and recycled air conditioning. You thought, this is where important work gets done. You were right. You just didn't know yet what important would eventually mean. Your first assignment was a grid reference on a printed sheet, 12 digits. You verified it 3 times because they told you to verify 3 times. You signed your name in a box at the bottom. You initialed 2 more boxes. The sheet went into a red folder. The red folder went into a courier bag and disappeared. You never saw that sheet again. But somewhere, someone acted on those 12 digits. You didn't ask what happened next. That was the first thing you learned not to ask. Operation Epic Fury was not one operation. It was a machine with rotating parts. You were one part. You were told your part mattered. In a certain sense, that was true. You went through a 7-day orientation process before any live assignment. You signed 17 separate non-disclosure documents. You were told the classification level of your role 3 different times. It was not permitted to say it aloud until the 3rd telling. You memorized a 12-digit identification code. They told you never to write it down. At the target analyst level, you worked 14-hour days without exception. You cross-referenced signals intelligence against ground observation reports. You flagged discrepancies in a log. You filed discrepancy reports into a secondary red folder. That folder sat in a metal tray labeled Priority Review. By Friday, the tray was full. By Monday, it had been emptied and refilled. Nobody ever discussed what happened to those reports. You learned not to ask. Asking the wrong question twice put you on a list. Nobody told you the list existed. But you could feel its edges whenever a supervisor paused before answering you. Here's something nobody tells you about this work. 83% of junior analysts wash out in year 1, not because they're incompetent, because they ask too many questions too early. You survived by learning to hold questions privately. You wrote them in a small notebook nobody told you not to keep. That notebook became your secret second life. It was the last honest thing you owned for a long time. Your body started changing around month 4. You stopped sleeping past 4 a.m., not because of an alarm, because your nervous system had recalibrated toward threat awareness. Your jaw was tight every morning before you opened your eyes. You saw a base physician about the jaw tension. He prescribed a bite guard and a mild muscle relaxant. You took the muscle relaxant 3 times and stopped. You needed to feel the tension. Tension meant you were still paying attention. The bite guard went into a drawer beside your bed. It was the first thing you left behind without noticing you'd left it. By month 7, you received your first commendation. Exceptional analytical precision under operational tempo. Those were the exact words. You read them standing alone in a hallway. Something warm moved through your chest. Pride, maybe. Or the very first payment of something that would cost you everything much later. You were told, informally, that 3 other analysts were reviewed at the same time. You had ranked highest in consistency. You didn't know you had been ranked. You didn't know there had been a review. That was also information they wanted you to have. You folded the commendation paper in half. You put it in your notebook between 2 pages of unanswered questions. Promotion to intelligence coordinator came at the 11-month mark. The average promotion timeline in Epic Fury was 18 months. 11 months meant you had been noticed at a high level. Being noticed felt exactly like belonging, and belonging in this machine was never free. The first week at coordinator level, you sat with 8 other coordinators. They were from parallel units you were not permitted to name. You learned the lateral communication protocol. Every inter-unit message required a routing code, a timestamp, and a dual signature. The authentication process alone took 4 minutes per message. You sent 31 messages that first day. You moved to a larger room. 3 screens instead of 1. You coordinated between 3 target analyst teams simultaneously. You built weekly coherence reports from their combined output. You tracked source reliability scores across 14 active intelligence streams. You standardized their annotation formats to reduce processing friction upstream. You were responsible for their accuracy. You were responsible for their errors, too. One of your analysts made a critical coordinate error. Your stomach dropped like a cut cable. The error was caught, mostly caught. You never found out the final disposition of that mission. You learned not to find out. Not finding out became a professional skill you stopped feeling ashamed of. Your partner called during this period. She called to say the apartment felt different. Not empty. Different. You said you'd be home by Thursday. Thursday came and went. You called her Friday from a briefing hallway. She answered on the fourth ring. That pause, 4 rings, registered as data. You measured it automatically. That was the problem. You were measuring everything by then. There's a statistic that moves quietly through Epic Fury's corridors. 61% of personnel above Level 2 report significant relationship deterioration within 2 years. Not separation, deterioration. The word is clinical. The reality is a dinner table where someone has quietly stopped trying to explain their day. By year 2, you were a tactical planner. This is where the work stopped being abstract. You were no longer just verifying coordinates and filing folders. You were building strike sequences from scratch. You were modeling collateral parameters using a formula no civilian algorithm touched. You were signing off on operational decision trees with real endpoints. That phrase, real endpoints, was in the training manual. You underlined it. You had no idea what you were underlining. A tactical planner's morning began at 05:30 with a threat environment review, 6 intelligence summaries before breakfast. You annotated them in red ink with confidence levels and discrepancy flags. You built a target priority matrix by 07:30. The matrix went upstairs to the operations officer level by 0800. You would be upstairs someday. You didn't know yet what upstairs felt like from inside. Your hands started shaking around month 19. Not visibly, not in any way that anyone could observe. After a long briefing, alone in a bathroom, you'd hold your right hand flat. You watched it tremble. You timed it once. 27 seconds. Then it stopped. You never mentioned the shaking to anyone in the entire program. You told yourself it was caffeine intake. You told yourself that every single morning for 14 months. There was a man named Harwick at the tactical planner level. He had been in the program for 7 years. He laughed loudly in the break room about ordinary things. He talked about his daughter's soccer games with real warmth. He kept her photograph on his workstation. She was 8 years old in the photograph. He mentioned once, casually, that she was now 13. He had not updated the photograph. You noticed that. You filed it away. 3 weeks after you noticed, Harwick had a cardiac event during a night briefing. He survived the event. He did not return to Epic Fury. His 2 active files were folded into your rotation without anyone officially asking. You absorbed them. You did not complain or request acknowledgement. That was when you understood how the machine processed grief. It didn't process grief. It redistributed workload. Year 3 brought the field liaison posting. Nobody warned you about this rank adequately. Not because it was the most dangerous, because it was the most seductive. You were the bridge between intelligence architecture and field reality. You coordinated directly with personnel who walked the actual ground. They trusted you because you spoke their language by then. Precision, economy, calm. Never show uncertainty in the field liaison role. Uncertainty spreads and costs more than any single operational error. You learned to present certainty you didn't always possess. You became very good at this. Then, you became exceptional. Then you started believing your own performance. That is the specific moment the seduction completes itself. Your notebook from year 1 was full by now. You started a second notebook, but the questions in it had changed entirely. Year 1, questions about operations. Year 3, questions about yourself. Who decides where the red folder ends up? Am I still the person who thought that question mattered? The field liaison rotation lasted 14 months. You lost 12 pounds in those months, not intentionally. Your eating schedule had collapsed into mission tempo. You ate when a gap appeared. You ate quickly, standing, tasting almost nothing. Your resting heart rate dropped 8 beats per minute. Your physician noted this as a positive development. It was not a positive development. It was your body learning to idle at a lower burn to survive the pace. One night on brief leave, you sat across from your partner at a restaurant. You finished your meal in 6 minutes. She was still reading the menu. She looked at you across the table. She didn't say anything. You didn't either. The silence lasted much longer than the meal. By the operations officer posting, You had been inside Epic Fury for 4 years. 4 years is a census milestone inside the program. 40% of personnel never reach this level. The ones who do share one specific trait. They stopped grieving operational outcomes sometime around year 2. They replaced emotional processing with procedural review. The internal training document calls this professional resilience. The people who had been there longest used a different phrase. They called it the disappearance. Not your disappearance, the disappearance of whoever you were before you learned not to ask. You sat in on your first strike authorization review meeting 3 days into the posting. The room had no windows. The table's laminate surface was worn at the corners. Years of elbows had done that. 7 people around that table. 7 signatures required for each package. 1 chain. No individual link was responsible. Operations officer meant you signed off on strike authorizations. Your signature was the final layer before execution. You expected to feel the weight of each one. You had psychologically prepared yourself to feel it. What surprised you was how quickly the weight normalized. By the 20th authorization, your hand moved to the signature line automatically, like the bite guard in the drawer. Like a 4-ring pause measured as data, like an 8-year-old in a photograph who had quietly become 13. Strike Lead required mandatory psychological evaluation every 18 months. By month 2 at this level, you understood exactly what the evaluator needed to hear. You gave it accurately and completely. This was not deception. This was professional fluency. You wrote that in the second notebook. Somewhere between year 4 and year 5, the notebook entries shortened. Then they became instructions to yourself instead of questions. Then they stopped entirely. The pen was still in the drawer beside the bite guard. Your partner left during the Strike Lead posting. She left the way water leaves, slowly, then completely. She left 5 words on the kitchen counter. I don't know you anymore. You read them standing in the doorway. You processed them the way you processed an intelligence summary. You looked for the actionable item. There was no actionable item. You went to a scheduled briefing. You cried 11 weeks later. Alone. In a vehicle, parked outside the perimeter fence in the dark. You cried for 4 minutes exactly. Then you stopped. Then you drove back inside. The suicide rate in high authorization roles like Strike Lead is roughly 4 times the general population baseline. You had read this in a clinical review document years earlier. You thought of Harwick, his daughter's soccer games, the photograph on his workstation that he never updated. You thought of all the photographs nobody ever updates. You thought of the version of yourself who would have updated the photograph. Strike Commander was not a promotion you pursued. One morning, it appeared on your access clearance. No ceremony, no pause for reflection. The outgoing commander said 7 words. The weight is the same. Carry it differently. You didn't understand. You do now. At Strike Commander, you build the operational architecture others execute. Your name does not appear on strike reports. Your decisions do. You review target packages assembled by junior analysts who remind you of yourself in year 1. They have pressed collars. They have paper cups of coffee going cold. They have questions they are learning not to ask in meetings. They hold their uncertainty behind neutral expressions. They are filing discrepancy reports into red folders they believe go somewhere important. You recognize every movement. You taught it to them without meaning to. The machine passes this down the way a body passes down its scar tissue. There is a red folder on your desk right now, not the same folder. It was never the same folder, but it looks exactly the same. You have signed your name in that box 1,100 times by now. Your signature looks different than it did in year 1. Your handwriting has compressed, tighter, faster, smaller letters. You showed both signatures to a graphologist once, off the record. She said it looked like 2 different people. She was not wrong. You open the folder. You review the contents with the automatic efficiency of 10,000 prior reviews. Your hand moves to the signature line. You feel nothing unusual. That is the cost. You could not have named that cost on that first morning. You can name it now. feeling nothing unusual. That is the entire price of everything you paid. Somewhere in a cold fluorescent room, a new analyst is verifying 12 digits on a printed sheet. They are signing their name in a box. They are initialing 2 more boxes. The sheet will go into a red folder. The red folder will go into a courier bag and disappear. That analyst will not see the sheet again. They will learn not to ask what happened to it. And they will be good at this work. They will be very good. The fluorescent light hums above them. It hummed above you too. You remember when that sound felt like the beginning of something important. You still hear it sometimes, late at night, alone in the quiet of a room full of decisions. It doesn't sound like the beginning anymore.